All right, so today we are going to start off with a grammar question. I knew that's why you probably all came this morning. So the term Christian, is it a noun, a verb, an adjective, an adverb, or something else? What do you guys think? Noun, all the above. All right. So there is a piece that I read. It was probably like 20 years ago now, and it asked this question, and it made a really good argument. And one, I kind of like the yes in general too. I like noun. I like that Christian is something that we are. I really like the idea that Christian is something that we do. I'll talk about adverb in a second. But the article I read years ago now made a pretty good argument that what Christian doesn't work well as is an adjective. And the reason why it doesn't work well as an adjective is because some of these kind of different categories is sometimes things will be labeled as like, okay, this is the Christian. This is the Christian bookstore. This is the Christian movie. This is the Christian music. And then this over here, that's the secular one. That's like kind of the world that I grew up in. And it kind of creates this divide. And what makes that tough is sometimes you can walk into a Christian bookstore. Some of you had this experience before, and you open a book that's a Christian book, and you start to read it, and you're like, I hope this isn't like representative of what Christian is like. And then other times you can like watch a movie that's a secular movie. Last week, if you guys were here, Tim talked about the movie The Lion King, and he brought up that there's some Christian principles that he got out of The Lion King. One of my most moving moments in my life, I was watching the movie Fight Club, which is not a Christian movie, in case you were wondering. And I just had this like epiphany of like, what they were showing in that movie is like, this is like what church is supposed to be like. And if you haven't watched that movie, then you can like figure out what that was. But to me, it was like God was speaking through this movie. And where I think it gets like really interesting is when you think about the idea of like a career. Because that's easy to think about. It's like, okay, my job, I'm a professional Christian. And so if you're a pastor, like you have a Christian career. But if you're an accountant, sure, okay. If you're a retired guy who plays golf every once in a while, if you work in an art gallery, what's up, Christine? Then like, okay, here's the Christian job, but then here's like just this other thing, and so this one's like really working for God, and I just think that divide is not helpful because you can absolutely be serving God and you can have a Christian vocation doing all of your different professions. But what I think, so I don't think an adjective works well, but the one I like best actually out of all of those, what we're going to talk about today, is the idea of Christian as an adverb. Because our idea is that we're going about all of our normal lives. And so later on today, maybe you're going to be mowing your yard, or you're going to be hanging out with your neighbors, or tomorrow you're going to go to work, or you're going to go to school, and you're doing all these different things. And the idea is that whatever you are doing and whoever you are is to do it in a Christianly way. That it's possible for you to do it in the way in which Jesus would want you to do things. And here's how Paul talked about that 2,000 years ago. He set up this idea that, and whatever you do, so whatever you find yourself doing later today, whatever you end up doing tomorrow, whatever you do for your career, whatever movies you decide to watch, whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, giving thanks to God the Father through him. And this would have been a pretty big deal 2,000 years ago, and it's a really big deal now, because in that world, and in our world, there's lots of different ways that you can do different things. And so today we're going to talk about the idea of marriage, parenting, and like slightly about careers, but I didn't really have time. So we're going to mainly talk about marriage and parenting today. But 2,000 years ago, it would have been there would have been a kind of a Roman way. That here's how Romans approach marriage. Here's how the Greeks, here's kind of their philosophy about parents. Here's how they do things. Sorry, I moved to Greek too quickly. There's the way in which Greeks kind of go about things. And there would have been kind of a way that you kind of fit into that. There would have been a very Jewish way that here's how, if you're Jew, most Jews kind of fall into this paradigm of how they view these things. And for us still today, it's very much the same. There's a very American way that we kind of approach the idea of marriage and how we approach the idea of parenting. But even in our country, as we all know, it's pretty polarized now. And so it's not even just like the American way. There's like, okay, here's kind of like the conservative. So if you find yourself more in the conservative spectrum, it's like, here's kind of how we do parenting. And some of you might have grown up in maybe a town where like most people were pretty conservative, and like the way in which they approach some of these topics is pretty similar. Or if you grew up in a city that was like more liberal, then there's kind of like a liberal way that you go about these. For me, so especially thinking about parenting, marriage, things like that. So my last name is Hentrick, Jonathan Hentrick. And so over 20 years ago now, Ashley and I got married. And so one of the things that we had to figure out when we got married, and some of you have been through this if you've come together with somebody else, is I kind of had like the Hentrick way that we do things. And here's the way my parents parented us. Here's how my parents did marriage. And here's how, in my family, here's how we do Christmas traditions. And here's how we do anniversaries. And here's what we mean by cleaning the house. And we kind of have, here's the Hentrick way of doing things. And then I married Ashley, and Ashley's maiden last name is Bourne. And so they had the Bourne way of doing things. And so here's the Bourne way that we approach and save money. And here's the Bourne way that we do summer vacations. And it took a long time to convince her that her way was wrong and that my way was right. She's traveling this weekend, so I can say whatever I want. It's wonderful. We had to try to figure out what this looks like. Just kidding. And this is one of the chief things that as we're working to follow Jesus that we need to all figure out. This is a quote by Pete Zaris that I love. He says, discipleship, which is that's what Christ Church Albany is all about, is we're trying to figure out what it looks like to become disciples, followers of Jesus, requires relearning how to do life God's way in God's family. God has a way that he wants us to approach every single thing we do in our life. Everything we do, whether in word or deed, that there is a way in which God wants you to do it. And that's a difficult thing because we have already been discipled. We've already been taught by our culture, by our parents, by the TV shows that we watch, by the music we listen to, by the books we read. We've been shown that this is what normal is supposed to look like. And now we are trying to relearn what is God's way of going about this. And this was very much the case 2,000 years ago when Paul wrote this letter to this little town in Colossae. And there was this new little group of people, 30, 40 people, that had just recently learned this brand new reality. They learned that, one, there wasn't multiple gods, that there was only one God, and that this God had come down to earth just a few years ago, had lived in another part of the Roman Empire, had died on a cross, was resurrected, and now they're trying to just figure out what does reality look like? How do I go about my day in and day out life? If what I just learned is real and true, then what does this mean? How do I live this out? And how do I relearn what it looks like to live in this new reality, this new family of God? And we've been talking a lot about that throughout this series, looking at this letter that Paul wrote, and there's a lot of things that Paul looked at in there. Today we're going to look at two specific parts of what it means to live in this new reality. Is what does it mean to parent, and what does it mean to marriage in a Christian way in this new reality? And so here's who this message is for today, because I know we're all at different levels relationally. So marriage-wise, this is for anybody who is married. This is for anybody who is thinking about getting married someday, hopes to get married someday. And this is key, we might miss this. This is for anybody who is friends or in relationship with someone else who is married. because there might be some of us where marriage might not be a part of our reality for our lives. But we are in community with some other people that it is a part of their life. And part of our being a family together is finding out what it looks like to live in these realities and encouraging and helping someone else. And so some of the things we talk about today might not be necessarily for you, but they might be for someone that you know. Parenting, this is for anyone in the room who is a parent, whether your kids are currently checked in upstairs or whether your kids live in another part of the country and they're grown up, then this is for you. And this is for anybody, this is the all play. If you have parents, if there's anyone here that just like appeared out of the sky, this is not for you. But if any of you have parents, even if they are no longer with us on this earth, then I think there's something for us today as we learn this together. So we're going to talk about kind of this new way that Paul is going to instruct us on of what it looks like to do these things in God's world. So here's how he starts. He said, wives. This first part is for wives. Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as is fitting to the Lord. All right. Who just loves that passage? Anyone just like, anyone like, sometimes people like will tattoo like verses on their arm. Anyone have that tattooed on their arm or they're like email signatures with like, that? Yeah. I get it. This verse could be one of the more misunderstood and misused scriptures in all of, especially the New Testament. And I definitely say, if any of you have been a part of a system that used a verse like that to kind of beat you down, I get that. But there's a part of it that I want to try to redeem. But to talk a little bit about how this gets misused, because this gets misused all of the time, and you see this in examples in all kinds of different places. And there was a great example of this actually just a couple weeks ago, and some of you might have heard about this, you might have seen it. There was a commencement speech at a college, and there was a professional football player. Sandy's nodding her head. Sandy's heard this story. There's a professional football player who was giving the commencement speech, too. This is a bunch of graduates. They're graduating from university, their graduate degrees, undergraduate degrees, PhDs, I don't know. And as he's giving the speech, this was one part of the speech. There's lots of dumb things he said, but here's at least one thing that he said in the speech. He said, "For the ladies present today, congratulations on an amazing accomplishment. Way to go. You should be proud of all that you have achieved at this point in your young lives." It's pretty good. "I want to speak directly to you briefly because I think it is you, the women, who have had the most diabolical lies told to you." Ooh. "How many of you are sitting here now about to cross the stage and are thinking about the promotions and the titles you are going to get in your career? Some of you may go on to lead successful careers in the world, but I would venture to guess that the majority of you are most excited about your marriage and the children that you will bring into this world. I can tell you that my beautiful wife, Isabel, would be the first to say that her life truly started when she began living her vocation as a wife and as a mother. I'm on the stage today and able to be the man I am because I have a wife who leans into her vocation. I am beyond blessed with the many talents that God has given me, but it cannot be overstated that all of my success is made possible because a girl I met in band class back in middle school would convert to the faith, become my wife, and embrace one of the most important titles of all, homemaker." Now, there is some pieces of that have some real validity to it. And I want to be very clear. If any of you here today, if you have a call and a vocation to be a homemaker, guys, if you want to be a stay-at-home dad, that's something that could be a great thing that some of you are called to. Some of you, if you are a stay-at-home mom, if that works, different patterns of your family. But one of the ways that this particular verse has been misused is it paints the picture that the primary and main role of a woman is that you need to make sure that you stay home and support your husband, and to do anything else is to somehow violate that. And that is not what this verse primarily means. That could be something that is called to by either gender, either one in a marriage, but that is not the primary call. But here's what this does mean. This does mean that you are supposed to submit yourself to your husband. And what does the idea of submit mean? And here's my easiest definition for submit. Submit is the opposite of being selfish. And so here's a little illustration about this that I just got yesterday. So yesterday, I had to take my son over to the store. He had a birthday party later that day, and I forgot to buy something for the birthday party. So we were going to the store, and we had to buy something for the birthday party. And we were walking around the toy section, and all of a sudden, my son, 9 years old, was enamored with the idea of all these toys and kept pointing out things that he wanted. And so I had to pull him aside and say, hey, buddy, we are actually not looking for anything for you right now. We are looking for something for Logan. And so then, to his credit, he kind of shifted in his mind, and he started walking around the aisle, and he's only like my son could do. And he's like, what would Logan want? What would Logan want? Would Logan want? And like his whole mind shifted. And that's the idea of submit. Of instead of walking around thinking, what do I want? How can I get out of this? What is going to make my life better? It's intentionally taking your mind and shifting it to say, what would somebody else want? One of the things that I often do whenever I'm doing a wedding, so I've done this at some of your guys' weddings, is I will have the couple standing in front of me, and I will look at the wife, and I will say, one of the things that you are saying today is you are saying to your husband and to all of these people that from this day forward, you are no longer the most important person in your life. And from this point forward, if you have to choose whether your dreams, your hopes, your desires come true or your husband's, you choose his. You are putting someone else as more important than yourself. And that's what this verse is saying. That if you are a wife, if you're thinking about becoming a wife someday, then one of the things that it looks like to follow and be a Christianly wife is to put your husband first. And some of you might already be thinking, well, okay, so that's fine, but what does the husband have to do? So I'm supposed to just make all his dreams come true, and what am I supposed to do in this? And yeah, that's what it says. Let's move on. Just kidding. That is what Jesus says. Again, Jesus came not to be served, but to serve. But again, this is why this has been so misused. And so there is another time where Paul says a pretty similar verse to this. This is in Ephesians. Ephesians 5:22 again says, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands, and as you do to the Lord. And that verse is quoted a lot. But what verse is often not quoted is the verse that comes directly before that. So that's Ephesians 5:22. And here's what it says in Ephesians 5:21. It says, submit to one another out of reverence of Christ. The idea of a Christian marriage. Paul, for whatever reason, decides to kind of direct to wives, but this is an all play. This is for if you are a wife, if you are a husband, if you're in a partnership, if you are together with someone, then the idea is that you are constantly both looking to each other and saying, how can I put you as more important than myself? I like how Andy Stanley says it, is that marriage, Christian marriage, should be a submission competition. No, I want you to get your way this time. No, I got my way last time. This is your time. No, I got to pick the restaurant this time. I really want you to pick the restaurant. Whatever. And we're just going around constantly thinking of the other person. And this, I think, extends even beyond marriage. This is just to follow Jesus. This is the incredible countercultural way that Jesus asks us to live, is that we are submitting to our spouses, and we're submitting to basically everybody. Again, another letter, Paul wrote this. He says, do nothing out of selfish ambition. Here's what I want. Or vain conceit. But rather in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. And again, this is the epitome of anti-American. This would have been the epitome of like anti-Greek, anti-Roman. This just like goes against the grain of like our natural, of like I'm so naturally selfish. I constantly wake up and think, here's the things that I want today. And it's a complete shift if you're going to become a follower of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus, to spend every moment of your day waking up and thinking, how can I intentionally figure out how to make other people as more important than me? To serve other people, to be like Jesus, and instead of coming to be served, to think, how can you serve other people? But particular in a marriage relationship, then we are supposed to find ways to submit to each other. And so I would ask you to spend some time this week thinking about that. How's that going in your current relationship? How are you doing of intentionally putting the person that you love as more important than you? Of trying to spend your day walking around thinking, what would they like? What would Ashley like? What could I do? What could I say that could help her better flourish today? And to spend my time doing that. So that's the first part. Next part. That's what it means to be a Christian. And a Christianly marriage is to submit to each other. Next one. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. So in that first one, submit, I think, gets a bad rap because there's so much baggage that goes along with it, and there's kind of like almost like an allergic reaction to it. And so one of the things I think we need to do is we need to like redeem the word submit, and submit should be something that we all want to do. That should be a verse that we want tattooed on our arms. Like, yeah, I want to submit to other people around us. That's what it looks like to follow Jesus. With this one, the word love is a word that I think we need to like bring back its punch. Because I think when a lot of us read that one doesn't really have much of a reaction to us at all. It's like, oh yeah, husbands love, yeah, sure. Like, of course, husbands and wives should love each other. Like, because we've made it so like Valentine's greeting card. Like, love doesn't like mean all that much. But for Paul, when he's saying, I want you to love your spouse, that would have had a much bigger and deeper meaning. And we can see that because we're in Colossians 3 here. Just a little bit before, in this same letter, in this same chapter, Colossians 3, Paul had laid out exactly what the idea of love looks like. And here's what he said. So therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with, and he's going to list some things here, compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. What Paul is saying here is the idea of love is like the frame for all of these things. When he says, I want you to love somebody else, when he says, I want you to love your spouse, what he's saying is, I want you to be compassionate towards them. I want you to be kind towards them. I want you to be humble. I want you to forgive somebody else. I want you to take on all of these attributes, and that's the way that I want you to treat them. And what we all know, what we talked about a couple weeks ago, is that all these attributes are things that are great, but they are things that don't just naturally happen. It's tough for us just to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to be a more compassionate person. Let me work. All right. Okay, I think I'm good. I think I'm more compassionate now. This is something that has to be developed. This is something that has to be trained. And so if you're with us a couple weeks ago, we wrote down some like helpful things like when you have had enough food, when you've had enough sleep, when you've had some time alone, when you've been a part of a community group, when you have good friends in your life, when you're not doom scrolling on social media, when you're praying, and when you're spending time with God. All of these actions can help us become the kind of person that actually is compassionate and kind. On the idea of spending time with God, we talked about these spiritual practices. We said the goal of spiritual practices is that they allow us to both spend time with God and they allow us to do the kind of things that Jesus did. That Jesus was a loving, compassionate, forgiving one another. And all of these things, I think, enabled him to be able to have the power to be able to do that. And they can give us the power. And so, again, I think this is an all play. This is for husbands and for wives. For you to love and to be compassionate, it's going to take intentionality on your part. You're going to have to intentionally engage in certain practices that will help you to be able to truly love them. You might not be able to be looking at social media and listen to them at the same time. You might actually have to spend time planning a date night. You might have to be intentional to sit down and actually have a back and forth conversation. You might have to say no to some other opportunities in your life so you're not so busy and so stressed out that you can't really spend time loving them. For you to spend time saying, well, what does Ashley want? Well, what are they? For you to be able to submit to them and to be able to love them, it's going to take an intentional practice on your part. But it goes beyond that. Because Paul says, I want you to love, but I also don't want you to be harsh. Again, I think what Paul's doing is he's just like reframing now for husbands and for wives and for parents and for all of us exactly kind of what he already said earlier in this chapter. And early in this chapter, he talks about the idea of harshness to some degree. He said, put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature, sexual morality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. And we talked about this a few weeks ago, but I think this becomes acutely there, and especially a marriage relationship. That if you are clinging to greed, if your job, if your money, if your stuff matters more to you than the people in your life, you are not going to be very loving, and you're going to end up finding yourself harsh. If you have sexual immorality in your life, if you have some sort of a sexual addiction in your life, that is going to make it very difficult for you to love, and it's going to come out as harshness. And so if these things are in your life, you're going to have to find a way to deal with them. He goes on. He said, but now you must also rid yourself of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other. If we are going to not be harsh to each other in general, but especially in marriage, if we have an anger issue, we might need to spend some time working on that. We're going to have to be very careful of the words we use to other people, and especially we say to our spouse, because we just have the ability to sting them so much. And like we said a couple weeks ago, Sue was so generous to share her story of dealing with alcoholism and going to AA. And one of the points we made about that is that if one of these struggles are in our life, if one of these things are going on, it's not going to be enough for it just wish it away. You might, if one of these things stands out as one of the things that's blocking you from loving in your marriage, you might need to go to counseling. You might need to have some confession with a friend. You might need to read some books. But one of these things will keep you from God's idea of what your relationship can look like. So that's Paul's idea of what it looks like to, in marriage, have a Christianly marriage, is that in a Christianly marriage relationship, there's submission, there's love, and there's not harshness. And those are things that we can follow Jesus into the midst of. All right, now let's move on to parenting. So children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Any questions? A couple things I want to point out about this. First, the idea of children. I think it's pretty cool. So Paul is writing this. Paul's in jail. We said at the time he's in jail, probably in Ephesus, in a pit somewhere, dictates this letter, sends it off to the church in Colossae with this thought that this letter, this group of 20, 30, 40 people is going to be gathered together in a house or in a park, and they're going to read this letter. And so Paul's writing this with this idea that it's going to be read in front of the church, and Paul specifically addresses children. Why? Because he knows that in this when this church gathers, it's not going to be just the adults that have gathered together and the kids are off playing or watching video games or watching a movie, but that the kids are a part of this church, which I think is incredibly significant that we could gloss over. Sometimes we say things like, youth are the future of our church. And someone will sometimes step in and be like, no, they're not they are the now of our church. Our middle school kids, our high school kids, our kids that are up, they are a part of our church, a fully functioning, the Holy Spirit is active in their lives just as much as he is in any of ours. And so I think that's the cool thing about this, just that the kids are a part of the church. But then I want to talk about the idea of everything. So I tried this. This is my daughter, by the way, if anyone thought I was just being weird to some random person. I tried this out actually with her earlier. I was like, well, what do you think about that idea of children obey your parents and everything? And again, it's almost like this allergic reaction, because one of the first things is to think about like everything, like, well, what about like terrible parents? And what about parents like, what if a parent asks you to do something illegal? Or what if the parents ask you to do something where they ask you to like murder somebody? It's like, yeah, are you really supposed to listen to a parent? I was like, well, yeah, I think you can read the Bible with some nuance, some question. If your parents ask you to do something illegal or kill somebody, you can say no. That's okay. But here's my guess, is for most of us, with what our parents ask of us, whether you're a teen, child, whether if your parents are out there somewhere still living, whether your parents are not living, and just there's this idea of honoring them and their legacy. For most of us, I would bet most of the things that your parents ask you to do are reasonable and have a real rationale behind them. And that you would have, it would definitely do you well to listen to them. And you could obey most of their commands, and it is out of love, and it is out of a good place of why they are asking you to do what they are asking you to do. But here's the kicker, is the last part, is the why. Is why Paul says that kids, my parents were in town this week, so I was thinking a lot about this actually as I was trying to figure out how to honor my parents. The reason why he says children need to obey their parents is not because obey your parents because your parents are always right. He doesn't say obey your parents because it's always fair, because your parents are always just. He says obey your parents because it will please the Lord. There's something about when we listen to our parents that it is actually worshipful to the Lord. When I was this week, hopefully, trying to find ways to honor and love my parents, there's something that I think God looked very favorably on that. There's something very worshipful to that. Then there's another side to it as well. It said, fathers, do not embitter your children or they will become discouraged. Again, I think this is an all play, moms and dads. But this is something that can hit pretty deep for me. I bet if you're a parent, it hits deep for you too. There's something that's just an unfortunate, I feel like, truth of life. But I feel like if we open up the question, I think all of us would say yes. That oftentimes it's the people that you spend the most time with and that you love the most that you end up being the worst to. And when you are stressed in life, when you have too many other things going on, it's easy, to still be nice to the cashier. It's nice that you can be nice to the Uber driver. You can find ways to even be nice to the employees that stress you out so much. But then you come home and you have all that stress on your shoulders. And then your child will ask you for something that's pretty easy, or they will do something where it's like they spilled milk or they did something. And we take all of that stress and we let it out on our kids. And I bet everyone, if they're a parent, has had that moment where you've kind of overreacted in a situation and you see something in your child's face where it just, something discourages, it crushes them to some degree. And I think one of the things that Paul is saying here is that kids are amazingly resilient. And so if we have bad moments, and we're all going to have bad moments and bad days, and we kind of unleash on our kids, if that happens every once in a while, our kids will hopefully forgive us. But if it becomes a pattern, you can discourage, you can alienate. And some of us, we know that from our own growing up experiences, of the way that our parents treated us has been so hard for us, and we're still in the process of overcoming. And so as a parent, we have to be so careful. And so again, I bring up what Paul said before. He said, but now you must rid yourself. Get rid of. If there's things in your life, you need to spend some time, go see a counselor, read some books, spend some time with someone in your community group, having an accountability partner. But if you have an anger problem, a rage problem, malice, slander, if you're regularly just like spewing filthy language, that's something that's going to come out on your kids, and it's going to hurt you. So again, I like what Paul does in this whole thing because he talks, children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord, and fathers, do not embitter your children. And I read this in a book this week, but it's this idea that like children need discipline. Children need rules. There's a reason why as parents we ask our kids to obey and why we want them to listen to us, because children need discipline, but so do parents. And so kids, feel free to call us out. And let's work to figure out what that looks like to follow Jesus in that way. So all of that, that's what it looks like to 2,000 years ago in Colossae and for us still today, to Christianly live out this idea of marriage and parenting. So with that, I want to bring it to very real life now. So one of the things we've been trying to do during this series is have different interviews, because all these things, like, it's easy to like roll around in our minds, but like, what does this look like in real actual life? With like real actual people, real actual marriages and parents. So Jared, now so you guys can steal the stools that you have there if you want to. Have graciously agreed to share part of their story of what it has looked like to try to marriage and what it has looked like to parent in a Christianly way. No stool for you?
No, I'm good.
All right, good. All right, so we have a few different questions, but you guys can kind of take it as you go. So we had a brief conversation earlier this week. So first question is, sometimes I think there's a myth in Christian world that's like, really, if you are just a Christian couple, really everything is pretty easy in marriage. So like, be Christians, go to church every once in a while, be married, and like it's just going to be like easy. Like marriage isn't really all that much work. So tell us about how that has played out in your life of just marriage just being easy as long as you were going to church every once in a while.
It doesn't happen. I can tell you that much.
Tell us about the story of just you guys getting together and becoming married.
Okay, so we met in high school essentially, but we started working together, and then we started dating in 2013, and then 3 years later we got married in 2016. We moved out of state, away from our family, about 3 hours away to Indiana, and then a year later we moved to New York, even further away from our family. And then, what happened after that? A big blur happened once we moved to New York. It's been full of adventure.
You became part of Christ Church?
We became a part of Christ Church within the first week one. It was our first church that we went to in New York, and there was amazing connection. Jared, some of you might know this, Jared actually attended John and Ashley's wedding when he was like 10 years old, and we didn't really realize that until we were sitting there reading the little pamphlets, and he was like, I think I know him. And it was already weird enough that we were like in the Elks Lodge, and we were like, this is odd, but okay. And then it just was kind of like a piece of home. Ashley's dad was Jared's father's best friend and best man at his wedding, and so there's just a weird tie, and we got to know more people and became kind of part of this wonderful melding pot of a church and family. And then through the family that we have here, a lot of them are no longer with us. They've moved out of state. We started fostering classes in 2018, I believe, or 19, and in November of 19, we started fostering officially, and then we had fostered about 7 kids between November to July of 2020. Samara came into our lives in March of 2020, and a month later, we had 2 more kids, so we went from 0 kids to 1 kid to 3 kids within a matter of a month or 2. It was a big change, especially during COVID. We were both working out of the home the entire time during the pandemic. There was no working from home for us. And so managing 3 kids that are not yours, essentially, but you have to treat them as if they're yours, love them as much as you can, and give them a safe environment all in the midst of a pandemic. I mean, you guys can only imagine how difficult it was just to manage your own. Imagine managing somebody else's. But we had brought them to church with us as much as we could when we were doing that, and that was a challenge itself. And then we adopted Samara in 2021 of May, and through the midst of that journey.
Yeah, so we'll pause there. And so, so you guys have literally been a part of, not just Adrian, you've been a part of this church. You've been doing the things that we ask church people to do. You were part of community group. Yep. You had this big call in your life to foster and then adopt. You were doing the Christian things. I'm guessing this is where you. Through the midst of that, marriage was still incredibly difficult. And so, talk to us as honest as you can about the struggle that you guys have had in marriage.
So I'll open by saying, this is my absolute greatest fear. Monday through Friday, I can sit at work and put up a presentation. I can talk with people that if I, quadrupled my salary, it would be a drop in the bucket for them. I can talk to that all day long. And, I realize that and just having some humility. The problem is I don't know them. The problem is that I do know you guys. So that's where that comes in. Now I have to be humble and be open to share this. John, how long have I known you? I say that because John was the first person to introduce himself, and it left an imprint, we'll say. So, thank you, John. It was for clarification. Sorry, what was your question here?
Yeah, so tell the story of the difficulty of marriage over the last couple of years.
I can kind of sum this all up, and I think everyone who's been married, there's one common theme they talk about. And it's tough for me to discuss, but I did not fully understand the two becoming one. When they talk about that commitment that you're making with your marriage to Christ, you're spiritually becoming one. I did not fully understand that. I didn't understand the amount of effort. I didn't understand taking away the selfishness. Every aspect of my life and her life needed to be together. That was something that, I will tell people coming into it, and honestly, even people that have been married for 40 years, and it's going to continue to be a challenge to learn from, but that two become one, and removing all that selfishness, everything that I wanted, all, my personal greeds, how I thought our lives should look, how I thought my free time should look, all those things, that took years, and to be honest, still working on that to figure out how that fits in.
That's good. Yeah, so what all happened by not making two one?
When he speaks of selfishness, that comes in many forms. It comes in money, it comes in time, it comes in emotional availability, and that was a bigger thing for me, was the emotional availability, to be open. He would rather just hold them and sit in his corner and avoid it, I love you. But in the midst of adopting Samara, we were actually going through fertility process. We had been diagnosed at that time with unknown infertility. We had no idea that somebody who's 27, 28, both perfectly healthy, textbook-wise, could not have a baby and not have a reason. So with that being said, I was going through a very big emotional roller coaster as a woman, as a wife. We had these plans to be a family, and I felt alone. I felt broken as a wife. I felt like I couldn't provide for our family. And that was one of those views of this marriage, is that you're in it together, you're in it to win it, that person's with you, they're going to support you, and they're not always going to support you. They are their own individual human, and that was something really hard for us to overcome, was that we handle our emotions very differently. I was very, here are my emotions. What would you like to try? And Jared's like, oh, I don't know about that. But after that, probably 6-7 months after that, we actually ended up splitting. I did not live with him. I moved out of the house. I lived out of the house for a year and a half, maybe close to 2. Just a few blocks down, still kept it close. Our main goal was co-parenting, which is its own ordeal. Even when you live in the same household, you guys may have a different view of how to handle a certain situation when your kid spills the milk or when they don't want to do bedtime. But we had to work together outside of that, which somehow built our communication up way better. We became more emotionally available to each other. I think at that point we found that time that we did spend together was more precious at the time, because we weren't spending every day together. You don't walk in the door and you're like, okay, yeah, you got this, you got this, you got this. It really opened up the line of communication for us, and we had to if we were going to be able to get back together and make it through a marriage.
Good. All right, so that'll be our last part then. So yeah, the idea of people being selfish and ended up in a marriage together is that's what non-church people do. Christian people end up being selfish in marriage. Christian people suffer through really difficult things like infertility and difficulty with how we're going to have kids. And in people who go to church and are in groups, and maybe some of you right now, end up getting to the point of needing to split and being like, I think this marriage might be over. But then what makes it the cool story for you guys, and I think what, as people who are following Jesus, is that when you guys were at the point of where a lot of people would have called it quits, and just is that, you know what, it's just easier to be selfish, you decided to make a change. And so give us the last part of the story, which is not the last part because it's always unfolding, but where are you guys at now of the decisions you guys have made to choose a different way of not ending the marriage?
So I'll start with, at least from my side, and a little bit of the importance part. I know you mentioned, you kind of asked, where's Jesus fit into all this? Where was that interjection? I'll say, for myself, I hit a point where, and this goes right back to humility, I had to come to the acknowledgement that I was no longer in control. There was nothing else I could physically do. There was no other, words of affirmation or acts of service or any of that. There was nothing else that I could physically do. I asked, maybe a year into this, what do I need to work on? What do you need from me? What do we need to work on? And then, we're at a pause period where the only thing that I could do was pray. And that was hard for me. There was frustration, anger, and I ended up having to, swallow it down myself and say, all right, I got to ask other people. I had counsel with probably 3 people, and ironically, as I was thinking about it this morning, one was a family member, one was a coworker, and one was a close friend. Every single person had a really unique, and I'll say planned, just disposition. I had one that I thought would be the most judgmental person in the world, and they were completely open. They just listened. They didn't challenge me. They didn't interject their opinion. The person that I thought was going to be just the listener was the one that interjected their opinion. They gave me, advice as much as they saw fit, as much as they could. And then I had another person that I didn't expect to come out of it, but a coworker, and actually my boss, and every single week, multiple times a week, he checked on me. He would literally text me at 7 o'clock at night and say, hey, my wife and I are praying for you guys, it wasn't that he was praying for me. It was that he was praying for, myself, Allison, our daughter. For me, that was the trigger and the important part of seeing, this is where I saw Jesus working in this. And that was a really good turning point, at least for myself, realizing that I can't be in control of everything. And then I guess moving forward, every day is a continued process to work through things. I mean, this week we were talking about what we wanted to say, and the irony is, as we're going through what we're trying to say, we're not on the same page. It was like, yeah. What do you want to talk about? Wait, that was an issue for you?
But it opened a line of communication.
It did.
Yeah.
Just a 30-minute conversation, actually talking through all these things was, that was probably more than I was willing to give up, emotionally and spiritually, for the first 4 years of our marriage, to be honest. So, for us going forward, just on the marriage front, we continue to work on that communication. We continue to see, what does that mean for us to be together spiritually?
Serving each other, rather. I mean, we were really big into serving our
Yeah, and
community.
that's-
We are very big givers, and we give energy outward. Thank you. We were constantly serving outwardly with Love Albany, Serve Albany, and like Street Soldiers and a lot of other non-for-profits in our area, and fostering, and that took up a lot of time. But what we weren't doing was we weren't serving each other. That was the big conclusion, I think, that we came out of this in our discussion yesterday, is that we weren't serving each other. And ultimately, you need to serve each other when you're in a marriage, because when you serve each other correctly and kindly and with humility, you really are also serving God during all that.
So good. And sometimes I want to underline what you said there, Jared, of you reached out to 3 people, and I think it was even more than that. But, man, it's just so key that for someone who was keeping emotions back, that you talk to other people about this, that as you were going through struggle in your relationship, you were willing to be vulnerable with somebody else. And I feel like that's so big for so many of us as we're going through whatever issues we are in our relationships. Don't go through them alone. I think that's great. That's great. Anything else you guys want to throw in? And just to close an eye, because you guys missed it, you guys decided you were going to move back in with each other, so you guys are now living back in the same house?
Huzzah!
Yeah.
Yeah, so we moved back in together last April, not this April, but last April. And we're renewing our vows, and no, we're not, but that would be pretty cool. Right now, yes. I'm not ready. But one of the things that John had said when we had talked about what we were going to talk about was that even when we were going through this, a lot of people, didn't really keep it under wraps. I mean, it was kind of semi-private. Our group knew about what we were going through because, you need that community. You need to be open with other people. And it allowed me to also connect with other people who have been through similar journeys. But in the midst of me actually moving out, I actually applied for the assistant director position in CC Kids. And our marital status didn't matter in regards to what we were going through. I mean, some people who are going through marital problems or are divorced or, are just in a really broken marriage or, whatever the scenario may be in that status, may feel like they're not good enough to hold a position like that or to serve in a certain area because of how the community or your church may look at you. We got nothing but support in regards to that. And some people did notice how hard it would be to serve going through what we were going through. But we really appreciate the support that our churches gave us through the entire ordeal and the current marriage that we have. So
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, if you're looking for a church with a bunch of perfect pastors and stuff, the senior pastor, the children's administrator, our elders do not have perfect marriages. We are not perfect parents. We are in the process of working on this. And so if you are also someone that's in the process of this, you are in good company. I think you guys are probably perfect, right, Leslie? There you go. All right. Thank you guys so much for